want you to try and picture this: an asteroid belt of architectural garbage. Or how about this one? The National Automobile Slum. How about this one? The greatest misallocation of resources in the history of the world. Got a picture? These are just some of the, albeit very creative ways, urbanist James Howard Kunstler has used to describe the place I grew up. Suburbia. I, on the other hand, had never had the words to describe what life was like growing up in the Canadian suburbs. Sure, it was a good life, a great life. My friends and I had big backyards in which to play in on hot summer days. In the winters, we would pray for snow days when we saw flurries in the forecast. There were no wailing police sirens or drunken fights outside our windows, and we were driven everywhere. That was suburbia. But when I was 12, I saw a film that forever changed my life. It was called The End of Suburbia. It's a Canadian documentary made by filmmaker Gregory Green, and it stars James Howard Kunstler, who, as you just heard, is probably the world's most outspoken critic on suburban sprawl. The film talked about the abundance of cheap oil and how it would eventually lead to the inevitable collapse of the society I was born into. As I'm sure you can imagine, I was terrified. And I'll tell you right now, no 12-year-old should be allowed to see that film. But it was my eureka moment. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nadina, and at age 12, I decided it would become my life's mission to build better places for people to live. And tonight, I want to share 3 key findings from what I've learned along the way, and the surprising secret ingredient that has weaved a common thread between all 3. But first, where are we going? The UN has now estimated that 3 million people are moving to cities every single week. That's 3 times the amount of people that live here in Brussels every single week. There are many reasons people are pulled or even forced to cities. Cities are, without a doubt, the most successful social experiment of our time. And our future will remain urban. The thing is, 3 million people aren't just moving to cities every single week, but they're staying there for the rest of their lives. People are born in cities, raised in cities, go to school in cities, have their first job in cities, fall in love in cities, start their own family in cities, grow old in cities, and eventually die in cities. The entire life cycle of the human being takes place in cities. It has become the default biotope of humankind. So why is it that everyone is talking about how many people will move to cities, but no one seems to be discussing what kind of life they will lead once they move there? That is a conversation no one is having. And it's one I want to have with you tonight. On my quest to build better places for people to live, I went on to study ecology, human evolution, earth sciences, and eventually ecological engineering, in which I'm now doing a PhD. Ecological engineering, defined as the design of sustainable ecosystems that integrate human society with its natural environment for the benefit of both, has been developing over the last 30 years and rapidly over the last 10. What ties all of my disciplines together is their root in biology. As you might know, biology is literally the study of life, and it's taught me a lot about how we can build better places for people to live. So my first lesson from biology is this: a forest is much more than what you can see. Over 100 years ago, scientists discovered that trees and fungus would trade and barter carbon and nutrients with one another. You couldn't see it, you couldn't smell it, You can hear it, but it was happening under our feet, under our forests. You see, underground, there is this infinite world of biological pathways connecting fungus to trees and vice versa. And it was just 20 years ago that Dr. Suzanne Simard, a Canadian ecologist, discovered that it wasn't just trees and fungus that were trading with each other, but in fact, the trees were just using the fungal fibers to trade with other trees. And it wasn't just nutrients either that they were exchanging, but also wisdom. They call it forest wisdom. Similar to the neural networks in our human brains, trees in this connected system would send out an emergency alert if one tree was attacked by a pest, so that other trees could ready their defense systems. Dr. Simard's work, and that of many others, have revolutionized the way that we think about our forests. And more broadly, how we define the interactions between plants. No longer was a forest just a collection of individual solitary trees competing against one another in this Darwinian survival of the fittest fashion, but in fact communicating and cooperating. So that got me thinking. Could we take a leaf out of nature's book and copy a similar network to an urban context? One in which trees could not only communicate with one another, but also to us, people? You see, the life of an urban tree is not an easy one. In the wild, trees can live for 80 to 200 years. But when you plant a tree in a downtown core on a street, that life expectancy is cut to just 7 years. That's right, placing a tree in an urban environment is like placing it on death row. In short, we need real-time information to help our urban nature survive and thrive. What if smart city technologies, you know, the ones you've heard of, usually reserved for traffic monitoring or smart grids, what if we could use those to record that very information and in turn strengthen our stewardship of the natural world around us? I call that the Internet of Nature. My colleague, Sophie Niederslawski from the University of British Columbia, and I recently wrote a paper on this. We scoured the globe for interesting, fascinating examples of people that were using digital infrastructure for urban forest management. And we were amazed. We found some pretty cool examples. For one, in the Netherlands, where this past summer, there was a severe drought, just like many other places around the world. And that drought caused significant tree loss, especially in cities, where conditions are already hard. A company called Tree Mania has developed sensors. And what these sensors do is they collect information on soil moisture content. And then they send updates straight from the sensor to the tree manager's phone. Well, it's more like a text, but you get the idea. And when those updates are acted upon, they had a 99% success rate of keeping newly planted trees alive. And there are so many more examples. Cities from Boston to New York to San Francisco to Melbourne to Amsterdam have all mapped their city's trees using everything from Google Street View to AI to satellite data to volunteer geographic information. And it is exactly that kind of information that we need to determine where and when trees need help, so that we may someday be able to achieve 100-year-old urban trees. Sophie and I quickly realized this was much more than just a rapidly developing approach, but a whole new construct to urban nature. And we called it the smart urban forest. And that brings me to my second lesson from biology. Take a bird's eye view. Local governments around the world are working hard to bring nature back into their cities. The problem seems to be not when, but how. You see, a lot of the time, cities are growing in population, but constrained in its boundaries. So this green challenge, well, it's largely become a question of quality rather than quantity. The problem is, how do you define a high-quality park? What does that even look like? And perhaps most importantly, how does one know what to prioritize? Together with 3 earth scientists, we launched Green City Watch to try and find out. And when we asked those exact same questions to over 25 planners, what do you think they said? We don't know, they said. So we've become obsessed with trying to answer this question. Not only how do you define a high-quality park, but also how can you measure it, monitor it, so you can keep improving these urban ecosystems over time. We believe the modern bird's eye view takes the form of high-resolution satellite imagery. Just like when a bird is flying across something and it sees something that catches its eye and it swoops down to investigate, well, we can do the same thing with high-resolution satellite imagery. In fact, we can zoom in to up to a 30-centimeter resolution. That is the technological breakthrough that allows us to categorize urban green space quality. And the thing is, when you're analyzing an urban green space from space, well, you can see some things that would otherwise be pretty difficult to see in the field. For example, the accessibility of a park to different socio-demographic groups, or how green versus gray a park is, an important indicator of physical and mental well-being. And we're continuously updating this. Both us and our algorithms are getting smarter. And to this day, we've been able to do this analysis for over 30 cities. From Indonesia to the States to Europe, we've now been able to do something that no one else has done before. We've been able to map the quality of urban green space. And that brings me to my third and final lesson from biology. Adapt or perish. Now, as ever, is nature's inexorable imperative. While the climate change discussion may be moving at a glacial pace, nature is adapting right now. The animal, plant, and insect kingdoms don't wait around for political debate. They don't read the political blogs. They adapt because they have to. They adapt to survive. And we would be wise to heed the signs. I mean, animals and plants, they're already adapting, changing their breeding cycles, their diets, even their habitats. And if there's one thing that we can learn from this, it's that nature always wholeheartedly accepts this outside feedback and adapts as quickly as possible. What if those working on a city's natural spaces could learn from this? Not only learn from this lesson from biology, but also learn to integrate this feedback as quickly as possible. You see, our habitats, these urban green spaces, well, they've gained a couple functions in recent years. They're not just places for recreation anymore. They're places for social cohesion, ecological resilience, even growing and learning about food. So how can we improve these spaces so that we can maximize these benefits? It's pretty simple, actually. Listen to the people using it. Listen to your users. But I know what you're thinking. Listening in a city filled with people? Well, that's actually pretty difficult. My supervisor, Dr. Francesco Pila, and I have been working on a way to listen better. By leveraging machine learning algorithms, we've been able to figure out a way to harvest social media and online forum information so that we can sense the public opinion on urban green spaces. And specifically, we've been examining the surprisingly vast amount of reviews written about urban green spaces and translate these into digestible, understandable insights for cities. You see, just like how that soil moisture sensor can translate a tree's needs, social media and online forums can translate citizens' needs. As I went through these lessons, my 3 lessons from biology, you might have noticed the common thread I was alluding to earlier. Technology. Over the years, I have come to the conclusion that in our future cities, and on my personal quest to build better ones, learning from biology and executing those lessons through technology, well, those are inseparable from one another. So here's an idea worth spreading. Take nature online. By plugging nature into our information networks, we can better understand, interact, monitor, and improve our urban nature. And to determine where and when urban nature needs our help, when we need to step in, I suggest we embrace smart urban forests that communicate trees' needs. And secondly, to take a bird's eye view using satellite imagery to assess quality. And lastly, to tap into social media and online forums to reveal what citizens are really thinking. And I encourage each and every one of you, when you walk out of those doors tonight, to look at the city in a different way. Not as a collection of individual, solitary trees, buildings, technology, and people, but as the internet of nature, an integrated, interconnected ecosystem that so many of us call home. Thank you.